All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about something that's basically the operating system for our global economy, IFRS. It's called the Universal Language of Business, but what in the world does that actually mean for you and me? Let's break it down.
You know, it all really boils down to this one simple but really powerful question. If you want to invest in a company in, say, another continent, how do you actually know if they're doing well? How can you possibly trust their numbers? This was the huge problem that kickstarted a revolution in global finance.
Because before we had this common standard, the world of finance was, well, a mess. It was kind of like the Tower of Babel. Every country was speaking its own financial language, which, as you can imagine, led to a whole lot of confusion and a real lack of trust.
And this wasn't just a small issue. It created total chaos. For example, you had the US using its own standard, US GAAP, which was super rigid and rules-based. Meanwhile, the UK had its own GAAP, which was way more flexible and based on principles. Now, both worked okay on their own turf, but trying to compare a company from the US with one from the UK, it was like comparing apples to oranges. For a global investor, trying to figure out the real risk was next to impossible.
But out of all that confusion, a really powerful solution began to take shape. The idea of a common financial language, one that could finally unite the global business world. And that's the story of the rise of IFRS.
So, what exactly is IFRS? Well, to put it simply, it's a single set of high-quality, understandable accounting standards. Think of it like a universal translator for finance, created by the International Accounting Standards Board, with one big goal: get everyone on the same page.
And let me tell you, its adoption has been absolutely massive. Just look at this number. Over 140 jurisdictions around the world now use IFRS. We're talking about the entire European Union, Canada, Australia, and huge economies all across Asia and South America. This is not some niche little standard. It is the dominant language of global business today. So what's the big deal? Why does speaking this one financial language matter so much? Well, as it turns out, the benefits are huge, not just for big companies, but for anyone, and I mean anyone, who's building a career in the international business world. The first big win? Investor confidence. It's pretty simple, really. When everyone reports their financial health the same way, it just builds trust. That transparency makes it way easier for a great company in one country to attract investment from another, opening up a whole world of global capital. Second, it's a game changer for efficiency. Just imagine you're running a massive multinational company. Instead of having to create different financial reports for every single country you operate in, you just make one. A single framework like this slashes costs and cuts way down on complexity.
Third, and this one's huge, is transparency and accountability. See, IFRS isn't just about crunching numbers. It's about communicating clearly and ethically. It basically forces companies to be straight up about how they're doing, making it a lot harder to hide the bad news and way easier for everyone to hold them accountable.
And finally, all of this gives companies a serious competitive edge. When a business speaks IFRS, it's sending a signal to the entire world that it plays by the global rules. It's like an instant stamp of credibility that opens doors to new partners, new customers, and totally new markets.
But let's be real, getting the whole world to adopt a new language is never quite that simple. As amazing as the benefits are, the journey to actually implement IFRS has some pretty major hurdles.
And this slide really shows you the two sides of that coin. On one hand, you've got this incredible promise of global clarity, trust, and efficiency. But to get there, you have to climb over some very real walls. We're talking high costs, massive system upgrades, and just dealing with how complex these standards can be.
Let's dig into that a little. Companies have to spend a ton of money on training their people and completely overhauling their IT systems. For smaller businesses, just navigating the complexity can be a nightmare. Plus, even with one rulebook, different cultures and local regulations can mean people interpret the rules in slightly different ways.
But here's the thing. IFRS isn't some static set of rules carved in stone. It's a living, breathing language that's constantly evolving to keep up with our changing world, especially as we start looking beyond the old-school balance sheet.
This timeline really puts it all in perspective, right? We went from that messy, fragmented past to the unified present we have now with IFRS. But the future, that's where things get really exciting. The standards are already adapting to include things like environmental, social, and governance, or ESG reporting, and new realities like digital assets and crypto.
Which brings us to a really crucial point. For anyone who wants to be a leader in business or finance today, understanding this global language is just not optional anymore. It's a fundamental, non-negotiable skill you have to have.
So, at the end of the day, getting a handle on IFRS isn't just about checking some box for the regulators. It's a strategic move. It's about learning the language you absolutely need to speak if you want to communicate, compete, and win in this interconnected global economy.
And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. IFRS created one unified language for the world of finance. As we look to the future, what do you think is going to be the next universal standard that every business, everywhere, will need to learn how to speak?